If you had a meshed network, what happens is that you're not dependent on this one invisible line between the robot and the access point, but you have a line with your robot and every other robot around you. And those robots have also connection to their access point. So even if your connection to the access point breaks, you still have other connections around you through whom you can reach the access point.
All right. So all the robots are connected to the central access point, but are also interconnected.
That's exactly right. And that's even a relatively unique way that Meshmerize does, in that we do not say we only do meshed networks. We are able to cooperate with an infrastructure network. We coexist with an infrastructure network to reinforce it, to make it more reliable.
Like you coexist with 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Folge uns in das innovative Sachsen der Wirklichmacherinnen und Wirklichmacher. Gemeinsam machen wir uns auf zu Menschen, die Neuland betreten. Wir machen's wirklich. Ein Podcast von So geht's Sächsisch. Welcome to Wir machen's wirklich. I am Tobias and I'm happy to be guest of Meshmerize today. Meshmerize is a startup located in Dresden offering wireless mesh network solutions for agile and dynamic systems. What that is all about, we will learn in this episode. I am here with Sreekrishna Pandi. He is co-founder and CEO of Meshmerize. And as you have already noticed, we will conduct our interview in English today. So, Krishna, thank you so much for having me today.
Hi, Tobias. Thank you.
Now, before we talk about your enterprise, our listeners would surely love to get to know you a little bit personally. In order to do that, I'd like to ask you to complete the 3 following sentences for me.
Okay.
First one. When I came to Saxony, it took me by surprise that...
I'm going to assume this question is about Germany and not Saxony, because when I came here, I hardly knew the difference between Saxony and Germany, at least on the first day. How beautiful it was, without a cliche answer, because when I was back in India, I had an image of how Germany would be, and it was definitely different. It was more livelier than I was afraid it was going to be.
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
I put all my passion into something if
I know I will learn something out of it and come out of it as a better person. Because I'm a man driven with curiosity, and learning more makes me want to do things.
So it's not the success only?
Definitely not. Definitely not. I'm always looking at also doing other sports, like learning new sports, not necessarily to become the best at a certain sport, but I love the act of learning, getting into new things.
Mm-hmm. If I wasn't an entrepreneur now, I would
probably be working in a different company, but trying to grow myself to like newer positions and more interesting places. Potentially even a professional chef, for that matter, because I enjoy cooking a lot, and I would. This is one of the places where I would love to learn more and become exceptionally better at.
Do you cook all kinds of international food, or Indian or German food?
No, unfortunately, I didn't have so much progress in cooking Indian food because it takes a lot of effort and time. But I really enjoy cooking all sorts of food from outside. It could be starting from very simple, like Italian, and sometimes more nuanced, like Japanese food.
Okay, so you have many skills. By training, you are a nano-electronic systems engineer, right? How does that link to computers and mobile networks? Because Meshmerize is selling software.
That's right. My master's, which I did in TU Dresden, was on nanoelectronic systems. But I did actually a bit of a switch in my career. In the middle of my master's, I decided to switch more into computer networks, specifically because this was a field that I realized was booming up because of 5G, because this was 2015. And I happened to be very lucky to be in the right place in the right time in that sense, that at the TU Dresden, we were also having this 5G lab Germany initiative. And I figured this is a place where I'd love to, improve and grow. And that made me switch and want to explore the field of computer networks, because I had a sudden breeze of passion for that.
Is it still very new to you to be an entrepreneur? Because Meshmerize is still young. You founded it in January 2020, if I got it right.
Meshmerize as a company was founded in January 2020, but the idea behind it was at least 4 to 5 years old, even before that. And do I feel like a young entrepreneur? Yes, I do. I probably will feel the same maybe even 5 years from now. And I think that's really the fun at it, because the best thing about being an entrepreneur, especially at this stage, is that there are so many new things to learn and so many new ways to do things. And there isn't a right answer for all the questions. So there isn't someone who can give you the answers to it. You always have to find out the answers to those questions, sometimes even by yourself, not being able to depend on others' experience.
I guess you need to be the type of guy who then not says, oh my God, I did it wrong, all that past time, but okay, now I know how to do it.
Exactly. You need to be able to embrace unknowns. You need to be able to embrace maybe failures even sometimes. That's why I said it's not the only success that drives me, because you need to be able to understand that sometimes failures can be a really important part of becoming better at something. And it's the lack of success should not demotivate you immediately.
That is something I think especially we in Germany can learn to do better.
All can.
All right, thank you for that personal insight. Krishna, let's talk about what Meshmerize does. On your website, I read, quote, Meshmerize is a startup in Dresden that wants to revolutionize the communication of autonomous devices through organic multipath routing. With their software, static and moving objects of all sorts can communicate with each other, even independently from a stationary network. So that sounds thrilling, but not easily to be understood by laypersons. And let's assume I'm my grandmother, or probably I am my grandmother, because I probably don't know much more about it than she would. Can we go through that text step by step?
Yes,
together?
I would love to do that. So to break it down in simple words, you and I are sitting across this table here. And if I were to call your phone number today or right now, the call would have to go to a base station that's about 2 kilometers from here, and then come back to you. And every single bit of information that comes from my phone to your phone is going to travel these 2 kilometers, or maybe at least a few hundred meters, right? And this is this is the acceptable and the norm of how communication today works. But it doesn't have to be like that. And this is not only about cellular communication. Even if we are connected to a Wi-Fi access point, like in our house, and all the connection between your phone and the internet, or your phone to another phone in the same house, will have to go through the central access point. This is an infrastructure network, as we call it in the business. Mesh networks is the opposite of these infrastructure-specific networks, where we ask the question, why don't these devices talk to each other directly? My phone has a radio and yours does. Why don't they just communicate to each other directly?
What is the problem if they don't? What is the problem with the status quo model? If we think of a factory, for example, or traffic.
That's a great question, because the problem with having this central access point is that if you, in networking world, it's called like a star network. You have one central node in between, like the base station, and you have everybody who's connected to it with one invisible line, so to say, a leash, as we can imagine. And anytime this individual line is broken for some reason, which happens a lot, specifically in industries, because their radio environment is extremely harsh. So if you depend exactly on this one line between a robot and a base station or an access point, depending on this single line would mean that if this line is broken just for a couple of 100 milliseconds, you don't have connectivity. For humans and our laptops and phones, it's not a problem, because it means that our Netflix is going to be buffering a little bit more, or YouTube will buffer a bit more. But for robots, these 200 milliseconds are extremely critical, right?
He could stop. Could be a source of risk for...
Exactly. This would come to an emergency stop, literally. But if you had a meshed network, what happens is that you're not dependent on this one invisible line between the robot and the access point, but you have a line with your robot and every other robot around you. And those robots have also connection to their access point. So even if your connection to the access point breaks, you still have other connections around you through whom you can reach the access points.
All right, so all the robots are connected to the central access point, but are also interconnected.
That's exactly right. And that's even a relatively unique way that Meshmerize does, in that we do not say we only do meshed networks. We are able to cooperate with an infrastructure network. We coexist with an infrastructure network to reinforce it, to make it more reliable.
Like you coexist with 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi.
That's exactly right. Yes. It is not exclusive that you either have a Meshmerize network or a 4G network. Okay. We build hybrid networks. All that we as a company, our mission is not to make mesh networks great again. It's our mission to make better networks using mesh networks as a reinforcement, because we know that that's a better way and it's a better distributed and a cooperative way to strengthen the network.
So basically every robot in such an environment would be a router by itself, in a way?
That's right, because routers, we have learned through experience in our houses that routers are these special objects that are very different from our phones and laptops. In fact, from a networking perspective, they're not so different. They have a radio chip and they have an operating system, just like our laptops or phones. It's just a device that is connected to the wall. There's nothing very special about it. So yes, every robot will be acting as a router because there's no reason they shouldn't.
Could you install a mesh network without the central access point where all the devices are connected to? I'm asking because I've been talking to guys right here next door in Meißen who run an experimental vineyard. And they have the problem if they cannot rely on 5G or on the central access point. So how do they install a steady network? So could you say one of the robots has the program and is connected to everybody else?
Yes, so you do not require a central access point at all. It is just that we can coexist with them, but we by no means depend on another central access point. But of course, this means that this isolated set of networks cannot talk to the internet, but this is likely not their use case anyway. I mean, this is even more important when we think about drone applications. When you have a swarm of drones, like 5 or 6 drones who are flying away far, like to map a forest, for example, then these drones need to talk to each other to coordinate among themselves, and they do not have 5G in the forest by any means. So this is definitely a very, very key application for mesh networks in any case.
Okay, that's fascinating. Which industries would profit from that technology?
It might sound cliche, but the honest answer is pretty much every industry that requires a reliable connectivity and has moving things would profit from this. To give you a couple of examples, we already talked about robots, we even talked about drones, and more examples would be, for example, public safety. If you have firefighters who have to go into a forest to put out fires, and they do not have, cellular connectivity in the forest, but the firefighters have equipment which monitors their vitals, their temperature, and everything which the commander at the edge of the forest would need to know about. And as they move through the forest, then what they could do is just turn on a very cheap mesh access point and throw every 100 meters or every 200 meters. And this will create a network, which is battery operated, obviously. This will create a network throughout the forest so that they can just keep moving inside further and further and have connected this reliable connectivity. And also these firefighters who are within the range of 100, 200 meters of each other can still talk to each other or monitor each other's vitals and so on.
They can talk to each other. The sensors can send their data in real time, permanently. So you'd have the whole picture. And
yes. And another interesting, very, very relevant application would also be in agriculture. where we can safely probably say that 5G is not coming to every farm out here in Germany in the next 5 years, 10 years. And that also means that this is essentially a bottleneck for the agricultural vehicle technologies who can drive autonomously. The only thing they would need is some kind of reliable connectivity through which they can go about. And this would be an ideal place for a mesh network to solve, because all you would need to do is turn on some, solar power operated mesh nodes, spread them randomly across your farm, not any specific planning required for your network. And you have now reliable connectivity in your entire farm.
Especially you think of agriculture 4.0 as robot swarms working the fields, and not the one big machine that is connected to GPS, for example.
That is exactly right. And these 5 small micro farming robots, they're not that small really, but these still need a tight communication network with each other. These Feldschwarm, or the
Feldschwarm, yes, exactly the right word.
Yes. So, and I think these are like prime applications for such networks. And the list goes on with many other
The list goes on. It's traffic, of course.
Exactly. Connected
autonomous cars.
Yes, that's right. One problem with this is more a business problem than a technical problem, would be that it would be very hard for any internet service provider to be able to guarantee that I'm going to provide an extremely reliable 5G network from the west point of Portugal to the east point in, Bulgaria. And because that's where trucks would have to drive to, right? And because if I'm a truck manufacturer, I would want to buy such a service to make sure that my trucks can maybe autonomously drive through. Mm-hmm. And what do these trucks need to do? They need to only communicate between each other, like 5 trucks in a row, so that they can drive in like one after another in a platoon. If you had a means of reliably connecting them to each other, you don't need to depend on infrastructure from every point in Europe. But as long as these trucks are right behind each other and we can guarantee a reliable connectivity, we enable platooning. You don't need an infrastructure to make that happen every place that this truck can potentially travel.
They take their own network with them.
That's exactly right. Bring your own network is the motto.
Bring your own network.
Yeah.
Do business here. Bring your own network.
And we enable them to do exactly that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Awesome. By the way, all of that we have talked about so far is expressed beautifully in your name, Meshmerize, which is, if I interpret it right, a combination of mesh network, which is the Maschennetz in German, simply, and the verb to mesmerize, which means something like hypnotizing, stunning. Yes. In German, maybe bezaubern, faszinierend. So the German translation would be something like bezauberndes Maschennetz, if you will, or
yes,
Netzmagie.
Netzmagie. Oh, great! That's good to know. We will use that maybe sometime in the future.
If you have to translate it, yes, you're welcome. So you produce and sell software, and we already talked about which fields of industry will profit from it. But do you have another example? Who is or will be your main customers, and what is your business model exactly? You don't sell the robots.
We deliberately made the decision to sell software only, and made sure that Meshmerize is compatible with a wide variety of commercial off-the-shelf hardware. And therefore, today we can go out and install a software update on robots or Wi-Fi equipment that exists in the warehouses and factories to enable them with Meshmerize. And our prime business model, because of that, is essentially, you can think of it as a network as a service model. Mm-hmm. We provide network as a software update to enable reliable connectivity.
And the clients buy that software from you, or rent it or lease it from you? How do you do that?
They license the software from us in order to, it depends on who the client is. So we primarily work with 2 different kinds of customers, either directly with the OEMs, so the manufacturers of the the robots or of the network equipment, in which case we sell a per unit license for them to install Meshmerize on their device, and therefore they can serve their end customers with it. Or we also are currently building some kind of turnkey solutions to specific markets to provide them with a bunch of reference hardware, the commercial off-the-shelf hardware that we get ourselves, make sure we configure them specifically for that particular use case, that particular market, and sell it out. And there it is more a network as a service model where we lease essentially the devices.
Can you give us an example of a current project in the making between you, Meshmerize, and a client?
We are working with one example customer who is, and this is representative of many customers in that sector, who's doing warehousing solutions, so building autonomous warehouses, which means they build the robots, the shelves, and everything around it, and provide this as a service to end customers who need to operate that warehouse. And there they have a unique challenge that they cannot put access points inside the warehouse anywhere, because we are talking about a very densely packed warehouse where even humans cannot walk inside. It's only for robots. There are even no lights in that warehouse, because why do you need lights? Robots don't need they don't need lights to move around. They have other means of positioning, which and this is a very, very uniquely nightmare situation for any radio, because it is filled with metal racks, which is not the best friend for radios anyway. Plus, these warehouses can often store bulks and shelves full of water or any other liquid, which is also not the best friends of radio. And as a combination, by using existing networks today, which is where they started off with, and this is not even just about this customer, this is representative of at least 3 customers that we work with. And they cannot provide reliable connectivity to these robots. They go to the middle of the robot and they will get stuck. And it's a matter of time before they either get connectivity and then move on. Because at the very center of the warehouse, there's not as good connectivity, because like I said, you can only have access points around and not inside, because there's literally no space. What we do now with Meshmerize is to just provide, like I said, a software update. And now the robots can actually now talk to each other. So anytime, even if a robot gets in a situation that it actually gets stuck, which is extremely unlikely, even then, if another robot passes around, it can rescue the robot who has been stuck.
What are the prospects of the market you position yourself in?
Speaking specifically about the AMR market that we just talked about, it's one of the fastest growing markets in the industrial sector, especially in the warehousing sector, which was even further accelerated by the COVID and the pandemic, because the need for autonomous warehousing has skyrocketed. So this one has about a CAGR of 40%, and this is one of the fundamental reasons also why we decided to latch on to that market and expand from there on. And in terms of our prospects for the future, the goal of Meshmerize is, of course, not to be limited within this one market. This is the market where we want to prove how Meshmerize can be of value to moving things. And eventually, our goal is not to become just the connectivity solution for moving robots, but become a de facto standard for connecting moving things or any moving devices, so to say.
So you are going to hire. Whom do you looking for?
Yes, so we are looking for pretty much every possible talent out there. But right now, today, we are looking for 2 specific kinds of talents. One would be what we call a pre-sales engineer or technical sales representative, if you will. This is a person who is somewhere in between a technical person who can understand the nooks and corners of network, but also a salesperson in the hand that he faces customers and actually understands the problems and the unique situations that customers are in, and trying to interact with both these worlds. An advantage of a company like Meshmerize in this phase is that we are so lean and agile that we have the luxury of changing our product or adapting our product based on what our customers want rather fast. And in order for this process to work, you need you need the right kind of information flow in both ways, in order for the customers to understand what we do, and in order for us to understand what the customers really want at the end. And that is a very key position. That's a very key talent that we would need to make that happen. And this is one of the spaces where we are going to be looking for multiple people to enable us to do that. The other one would be a business developer. Even though I mentioned that our goal is to go into the Industry 4.0 market first and go to the others later, it is, of course, not too early to start to look and expand and to understand how potentially different turnkey solutions can be put forth in other verticals. And we want to start exploring these relatively early on, because what we have today is Meshmerize as this technology. And we believe there are many, many beautiful opportunities to productize to the right markets and the right verticals. And we would love to speak with talents who actually have exactly that kind of capability to build excellent products out of such existing products or existing finished technologies.
Mm-hmm. So it's not me, unfortunately, but if you're out there listening to this, get in touch with Meshmerize. We learned a lot about the technical things. We learned a lot about what you do and about mesh networks. Let's talk a little bit about you again. You started your studies in nanoelectronics in Dresden in 2013. Why did you pick Dresden as a place to study?
It's a simple but funny story.
By chance.
Apparently. Because I wanted to...
You rolled the globe and put the finger out and you ended up in...
No, not really. So one thing I wanted to do right after I finished my bachelor's in India was to further my studies in terms of master's. I knew I wanted to travel abroad, so I was young and I had the time to go explore some other cultures. So I was passionate always about physics in particular, and I noticed that the nanoelectronics course that was offered here in Dresden would also have a tight connection with physics, because that's also what the curriculum is really about when it comes to nanoelectronics, what quantum mechanics and stuff like that, which really fascinated me. And when I looked for where to pursue micro or nanoelectronics, there were two places that showed up brighter. One was the US, and the other was Dresden and this side of Germany, essentially. And I picked Germany because I felt like the US was something that I relatively understood or knew about, more or less. But Germany, for some reason, attracted me a little bit more, because it was a little bit of unknown. And that also gives me the opportunity to... back then, I didn't know so much about Germany anyway. But from the little I knew, I realized that that was more of an opportunity to learn new things that I didn't know back then.
You knew Oktoberfest, for example, and
yes,
Angela Merkel.
Yes, that's probably the extent of what I knew about Germany.
Okay, that was the curiosity again that you mentioned at the beginning that made you come here. Cool. Did you foresee in any way then that you would found a startup here?
Definitely not. My goal was really to maybe do a couple of years here in Germany and then travel somewhere else after that, either back to India or US or something like that. And entrepreneurship or building a startup was definitely not like my life's goal or anything. This is something that I learned eventually during my progress, so to say.
So in which way is Saxony a favorable environment for Meshmerize?
So one thing I learned when I started getting into entrepreneurship and business development was that it has a lot to do, your success has a lot to do with the network you have around you and the people who are there around you to support you and give you help when you need and answer questions when you need. And it was fascinating for me how much of this network was available in Saxony specifically. and also how forthcoming people were trying to offer you help to learn things that you didn't know before, and also in terms of being able to network, to get you into the right doors, to talk to the right people. It was amazing. So us personally, we were even a part of the Spin Lab program.
In Leipzig?
In Leipzig, yes. But also in Dresden, we have a lot of network, and not just in terms of people who support startups, but startups themselves. In fact, from the chair from which we come from, which is from Frank Witzig, we have now about 3 startups which came out, and I'm positive that this will not be the last 3. There are more to come from the same place. So at any point, we don't feel alone as a startup in Dresden or in Saxony, for that matter.
Yeah, I think there's a whole range of programs to support startups in Saxony, is my impression. It's a pretty good...
Yes, that's right. And I think a key thing in that direction is also the people. So we have a couple of great universities, like Technical University of Dresden, which is amazing to get very fresh people and talent to actually get working into startups. And I think the mentality of the freshly graduated students and their urge to also get into such young startups, I believe this is a change from what I have seen when I first came into Germany. I think there is this change in mentality, and I believe it has, at least in part, to do with existing startup programs, or also currently the amount of startups that do come out and actually have shown that we can be successful.
It feels like, to stress that term, the project has a good karma in a way.
Yes, absolutely.
And thank you so much. I learned so much today, Krishna, and it was great to meet you.
Thank you.
And I wish the best to you and your company.
Thanks a lot.
See you again sometime, maybe.
Cheers.
Sie hörten den So geht Sächsisch Podcast Wir machen's wirklich mit Tobias Hülswit.